Shall we start?
Yeah, you give us a warm
We're waiting
introduction.
for her.
And
Yeah,
we
and
go
then
for
by
it.
the
We
time.
can't wait for her to do the right thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Missed the train?
No, there was one cancelled.
Oh,
So welcome everyone to this live conversation.
it's
As you
working.
call it. Yes, we have an audience online, possibly. Not at the moment, but maybe that's so just a short introduction about what live conversation is. I was thinking about it earlier and I thought it's basically a pretext for people to join together, gather and have a chat together about ongoing artistic practices. And maybe we make it public so that there is also a way for the public into a creative process and what that might mean in a complex artistic practice. So today we are here in the framework of the Archipelago of Artistic Practices. And we have invited two rivers, the Zenne and the Sambre, represented by Natural Contract Lab, Lucia and Fini, and Vincent Meessen is here representing the Sambre, which is maybe it's a big statement. Voilà. I'm Luz from Nadine.
I'm Max, I'm an artist and I'm a member of Jubilee.
And I think Max is going to give a little short introduction on what we did today. Or do you want to keep that for later?
Maybe it's good to keep that for later after the presentation so that we can confront it with each other and then we can have a discussion.
So then we start with Natural Contract Lab. Welcome.
Thank you for this. Okay. So so we will try to explain or try to share with you what we are trying to experiment with the bodies of water. We have started this practice, I think, in 2021. It's recent, but it feels like we are actually developed a kind of practice that we say, Vinny says all the time, we are practicing the practice. So it means that we are always adapting what we do in the ground. At first, it started with an idea, because just to give the context how I started, I was very focused on researching about rights of nature and how we could represent other than humans in a courtroom. It's a long process that I will not go into it, but that trial or that potential theater piece that was the only one I did became the 7 impossibilities to represent other than humans in court. And that led to the invitation of initiating a group that would be focused on how can we actually think of other forms of justice that is not about representing other than humans, but it is actually the basis of understanding how we can cohabit together in this world. So the first focus was actually that we would choose damaged landscapes and learn from these damaged landscapes to see where we can see the potential of this transformative, that it comes with, if there is an ecocide, what can we learn from what happens after an ecocide and how the people who live in those damaged landscapes have actually to deal with the situation. I say one example, like we worked with Sepka Sajumi, it's a lake in Tunis. So it is a lake where actually people do not go there anymore because it's highly polluted and it's a dumping ground. But it was actually our approach there. It was how we could commemorate this landscape with new memories to bring back life into life. I mean, also people back to that lake. So we have different approaches. Each river tells us a story. We try to hear the stories of the river, and we try to adapt into our practice. And as a beginning of our work, it's also the fundamentals of restorative justice. So we had Brunil Dapali, who actually support the basis of the practice that she wrote a protocol that at the beginning she started protocol of repair because it's something that comes really from restorative justice. And for us, then it later changed to reciprocal care because we felt like we are not here to repair the waters of the river, but we are here to actually see how we can reciprocate a relationship. You wanted to share about the transdisciplinarity
It's
of
nice
our
actually.
process.
But I also remember because I worked on this. That's how we met each other, was through the trial. And I remember you always saying the river doesn't want to be in court. So this was kind of also my entry point into this project, which is somehow also using the somehow starts with these pillars of restorative justice, ecological grief, and rights of nature. Not necessarily, not a way as results, but as tools, as way of thinking through the relationship and restoring relationships that we have with the river. What I think is important to also start with is that we always, when we talk about who is Natural Contract Lab, we always include the river as our ally. As it shapes our practice. It really, it also teaches us. We look to the river as teacher, as ways to learn. The river can take care of itself. Like it doesn't want to be in court. It can take care of itself. So we look to river as teacher and what it can teach us about restoring relationships with. And the group is also, so including the we're transdisciplinary also, which I think is a really important part of our practice, because we bring together all of these different practices from rights of nature, ecological grief, echo and sensory sonography, architecture, philosophy, sound practices and research. Rights of nature. And that practice of approaching from through, with and through each other's disciplines. It involves somehow also this practice of unlearning existing relationships and existing vocabulary, looking through each other's vocabulary, which allows us to also see the complex ecosystem of relationships that we now come to understand is a river.
But it's also interesting to say that, for example, having Marine and Bruna, one from restorative justice and the other from rights of nature, actually it doesn't mean that they have the same fundamentals of work, because restorative justice is focused on reconciling and restoring, and rights of nature is trying to make justice with punishment as well. So there is there was always friction between Bruna and Marine in terms of how these two disciplines come together. I think now it's much more merging. It has changed a lot the last years, but it's also like to see that the same friction as you see here with artists, there's also the same friction that exists in restorative justice and rights of nature.
Yeah.
So maybe we would like to focus today on the Still Here. It's an alliance of care for the Zenne River. And we would like actually just that we bring the Zenne here with us. We have been actually everywhere we walk. We actually gather water. So we have been walking from the source to the bifurcation. It's the first body of water that we are able to do the whole length because it's only 103 kilometers. Like in Portugal was 300 something and Rona 400 something. So we are, for the first time being able to mix its waters from the source. So we have been gathering waters as a water ceremonial way of also mixing the territories. And I would just like to bring the Zenne here with us. You can also, we're going to pass this around. This water, it's a mix of all the walks. We have all the territories. And it's also, a way in which we keep the memory, because we actually see and feel that the water contains the memory of our presence close to it. And it's a way to remember those waters. And normally when we start a walk, we always pass this river vessel around as a way to put our intentions towards the water. And also it becomes our talking stick. So we just pass around that you can smell the river and just feel it in your body. And we wanted to, you want to share the,
Yes.
we have done a bio of Zenne. It's our interpretation, very anthropocentric interpretation, but it tells a bit what we actually feel that this river is telling us.
Yeah, because also normally we start off by an introduction circle of people talking about their relationship with water or their relationship with the Zenne. Are there people here that know the Zenne? Yeah. So there's quite some things we could, some different memories. But I start with to introduce the Zenne, not to speak for it, but the Zenne is a river that starts under a willow tree. The willow holding open the space as the water humbly seeps to the surface in a farmer's field held open by trees, trickling down the slope to be slowly joined by water from its many sources. Like the roots of a tree in the village of Nast, its body widens as it meanders its way over 103 kilometres to its confluence in Zenne, where it bifurcates with the rivers Biela, Netta, Rupel and Scheld, and later mixes with the salt of the North Sea. It is a resilient river that has been reshaped, redirected, buried, and once considered dead as one of the most polluted rivers in Europe. Yet, with the solidarity and support of its companion plants, bacteria, and restorative projects, it has come back to life. And with this river, we can learn a story of adaptation and survival that emerges with the cooperation, the beings that cohabit its water, and the many people who remember its stories and love this river.
Welcome, Zenne.
Welcome to the river.
So actually this map here, it's a way in which we somehow map that it has more to do with the sensing or movement of the flow or what happened during our walks. And it's more about the movement and the flow than marking the territory. And our process has many layers, but one of the pillars, or let's say one of the practices that we bring more into the front, it is the act of walking with. We actually name it walking with because we feel that we are not just having a walk, and has been always many discussions when we do a walk. It's a walk. No, it's not a walk. It is a walk that entails a process, and specifically with the Zenne River, we are attempting to actually grow an alliance of care for the Zenne. We had kind of designed a process with phases, and were about.
So, thank you.
It will be fine.
Yeah, the phases about the walking with was actually, it started by us going to the territory, walking, trying to find people who actually had a relationship or remember the river somehow from the source to its bifurcation. So it shows actually 7 territories where we could learn from the people. And the first, how we do our walks is at first we walk with the people from the territory and they show us the way and what they know about the place. And that is the first time we get to know that space. And then we, from that space of knowing, we wander in the sense that we add the things that they told us, you shouldn't go there, or that is dangerous, or that's not. So we add those parts into the territory to make them the way in which we perceive the river, because we use sensory scores, modes of attention that try to open new forms of dialoguing with the river. And also to say that these 4 phases that I was just explaining, at the moment we have done 3 phases. That the first phase was walking with in solidarity and forming, like coming from a place of grief to acknowledge the landscapes that we have lost. And I will explain a bit further when we move into the ephemeral objects that we do. And we also do kind of, we work through clay that has been a medium also for us to actually map the territory. So for example, these vessels were done by Matteo de Blasio, maybe you know him. And it was also an embodied way of getting to know the river, because he went in many different places. Sometimes, one time he even fall inside. At some point he wanted to get to get the clay, but the clay was not, it was not enough, to make the vessel. So he ended up going to Bersel, which is a body of water. It opened also our way of thinking of waterways in the Zenne, because we start to learning about its solidarity waters around. And so this is how we start the walk, actually the phase one, to create a kind of empathy with the river, because some people do not remember the river, and they would also not, it was really difficult to find actually activism along the river or the guardians of the river. We did find like some NGOs that are actually taking care of the river in a very, how to say, governing the river, like Kunsthal Ghent, that opens some parts of the river, but also creates paths for people to walk in. But then you have also Zenne that makes wandering walks around, and also knows about all the sources that are around, knows everything about the Zenne, Contract Rivier. So we also got to know a lot from them. So this is to say that this alliance that we are growing, it's also, we were really digging and searching where are the people who still have a relationship with this river. So it was a more like, sometimes we went also knocking doors to, like in Senegal, there is this small group of houses. We didn't know anyone, so we went to have coffees with the people in their house, listening to the story. So it was a process of getting to know the river. And the second phase, we were more focused. So I think you both did only the first walk, which is the first phase. The second phase, it was more focused on the modes of care.
Yeah, and river as teacher.
Learning from the ecosystem. So not searching for representing the otherness, but trying to learn, like this story of the caterpillar.
Yeah. So I mean, but maybe I also go back like this idea also of memories, of grief and memories, is also really to restore the relationships. We often say a lot that we're actually remembering, or we're telling the stories in order to reactivate relationships with the river, because there's this idea that actually people feel like they no longer have a relationship with the river. But the more we go into memories or stories of grief or dialogue, these relationships start to emerge, and it becomes really present how much the river means for people, and somehow there's an invisibility of those stories in a lot of frameworks that deal with the river in a juridical way or other kind of. So what we're trying to do is actually bring in the voices of people's personal relationships into the frameworks of rights of nature, into juridic frameworks, into where decision-making or governance is happening with the river. And ways we look at the way the river can already teach us about governance is by using these modes of attention, of observing the river from close up, listening to the river, and seeing how the species actually already operate on cooperative systems or caretaking systems. One story that came was the story of the caterpillar, the not eating from the bottom. So somebody observed the caterpillar. It climbs all the way up to the top of the grouse in order to eat. It could easily eat from the bottom, but then the grouse falls over and there's no food for tomorrow. So the caterpillar already has, so this is the way that the river can teach us about other forms of other paradigms through which we can base our relationship of care with the river. There was also the story of the carp, the zwemblaas of the carp. The swemblass, I don't know if you know, it's an organ that the fish has to control its buoyancy. So it's a regulatory organ. We were having a discussion about how humans, we don't seem to be able to regulate our consumption, or we don't seem to be able to regulate it. And somebody brought in the idea of the carp, who has this organ in which it can regulate the amount of the amount of gas it has within its body, so it can control if it's swimming on the bottom or swimming on the top. And then we start to fabulate together, or maybe as humans, we actually need to develop this kind of organ or an external organ so that we can start to regulate ourselves. So this is kind of the way that stories are emerging from these material dialogues that we're having while walking with.
Yeah, and maybe it's interesting to say that when we were in the Rhone River, we were also like searching for tools of stewardship with the river, and we were not yet looking at the beings that were there. We were still in our human self, trying to understand what we can do as guardians for a river. And then we realized in the process that we can say innumerous things we can do. But at the same time, those things are actually not effective because we are not everyone wants to be an activist. So it's really about like changing the ways in which we actually relate to the rivers, because we know that laws have failed, the system has failed. For us, water, it's like one of the emergency of our times, because it is also one of the ways which it's cooling the system, the cities, and it's also we cannot live without water, and we know about what is happening. So it was also a way to question the way in which sometimes rights of nature presents the idea of being a guardian of nature or a river guardian. That like in Rhone, we encounter this group that you could click on a campaign and you become a river guardian. So it's like what we learn a lot from being with these other rivers and meeting so many different river guardians about how actually we could find a way in which this process could actually shift the way in which we interact with the river. That is not like, now we will take care of the river. No, let's learn from the river, and then maybe we can shift our ways of caring. So all these stories that we are collecting is to teach us new forms of care or guardianship somehow. So yeah, these are just pictures also to tell you about the different places of the river. I think this is the one that was because in the city of Brussels is underneath the city, so we had to actually open this hall. And it's also interesting to tell how did we manage to open this hall. It's not that we just open, but we learned that we can just open in the end. Actually, we didn't know. But for 4 months, we were trying to get permission to open the hall. And our first contact was that we wanted to put a mic to amplify the voice of the Zenne River with the hydrophone. And at the end, with Aquaviva, that are the ones who manage this, they said, we will not give you permission. And anyway, the Zenne is silence. Why would you like to hear it? So this was their last email to us. But gladly, we have someone in our alliance, Benjamin Thibault. He's part of Kunsthal Ghent, and then he said, okay, I'm going to open for you. So in the end, he could. He said, you have to go through all these bureaucratic things, but in the end, he could actually just open. And he said, anyone can open, also you just need the right tool. So the river actually has even its meandering sides. This is in Verde. It's actually a quite nice area of the river, but as you know, if you live in the city of Brussels, it's underneath the city. So the absence of this body is quite present. So here it's actually the first moment we saw the river down in the sewer museum, where you can actually just have a visit tour and see the river.
I think what also emerges in that in these experiences is the difference between the idea of the river and the experience of the river. And And I think that's why for us it's really important to spend time in the territory, to see what's present there, to also feel what's absent, and to start to emerge from a really personal place these relationships with the river, because this is how we also stop looking at the river as a line. I think we often talk about dissolving the line. That the river is more, it's a complex series of relationships.
Yeah.
It's more than just the water that flows, it's also the beds, it's also the bank, it's the grass on the banks, it's the species that live in the banks, it's the people that have somehow a relationship with the river, whatever that level may be. And this is actually for us what the river is. It's this living ecosystem of relationships rather than a line on a page or an idea in our head of what it could be or should be. And I think that complexity really emerges through the personal connection, or the revitalizing or the restoring of that personal connection with the river, and valuing that as just as legitimate as the voice of we can name lots of voices, but the voice of the politician or the city planner or the scientist, all of those, I feel that all of those voices are well represented in different frameworks, but the voice of the everyday person who loves the river feels somehow absent in the frameworks that we talk about, rights of nature or city planning or how to organise or govern the river. So I think that's really the basis that we're coming from, and trying to also not only reinvigorate it, restore it, but somehow find ways through this practice to give it legitimacy as well, that we can actually, because we care about the river, we have legitimacy to claim some kind of reciprocal guardianship, let's say.
Yeah, because the river is not only our teacher, but it is also transforming us and healing us in some kind of way. And that's in some parts of the work we do, which is when we work with grief, it has also this, it touches many levels of our being in this world today, because if I would ask any of you here in this room if you ever lost a landscape, I guess the answer would be yes, if you just take a moment, because we are constantly being confronted with the disappearance, even if it's a park next to your house or it is a memory of some landscape that you have had in your childhood. There's this constant disappearance that we can no longer grasp it. So what we also try to do is also using this idea that the river is a healer in some kind of way, and we can learn from it, as the Zenne River is a really resilient river, as there was no species in this river. Even SAR told us that they did a map in 2008 about all the rivers in Belgium, and they just skip the Zenne River because at that time was dead, so there was nothing they could map in terms of biodiversity. So it is a river that once it was actually even put out of the mapping of the water systems because there was no biodiversity. So it's a river that is being all the time buried, forgotten, and neglected. So it is for us like a really inspiration to learn from it, because if we think that there is that sometimes we are lost in which way we can find our ways to grasp and put our feet here. I think when we look at what emerges after death or a complete ecocide, then there we can actually find a lot of possibilities. Sorry. So basically, trees actually are a big support for our work. We always start close to a tree. We always do the grief circles where there are some kind of a rooting system of trees to support the work we do. And we use clay from Boom. You probably know if you are from Dutch, so it's a place where we can actually find clay that can be interesting for us to work with as a material. And basically, the way we try to do these circles is that we all it's a process of letting go, but also unlearning, but also commuting to each other's landscape, because we start by shaping your loss, which is a very dear and personal landscape, through remembering its senses and colors and memories and people and beings that were there. But then the process is actually that it becomes an entangled ecosystem of losses, and those losses are often merging, and then we also take the time to find a place to allocate those losses in the landscape. And those negotiations sometimes can take an hour, because there was also this time that was pouring rain. The weather, we also work a little bit with the weather, because it's often raining and storming, and the people who walk with us are always like really resilient and stay until the end. And there was this time we were really like between Lotte and Halle. We passed through this industry where the river is inside the all this industry, and then someone was saying, no, we should put the loss there
At the doorsteps of the perpetrators.
Yeah. And someone was saying, no, we should use the power of the waters. And then Benjamin, that is the Brussels environment, no, the water will actually take its the Zenne is so strong, he can handle all this, and it was pouring hail. And so it was actually really funny that people really take serious this moment, because it is actually a moment when you are allocating your losses somewhere, but who can take this? We are already taking a lot within, but external to us, who can take this? And maybe we come a bit closer to a conclusion with the sensorial cartography, to not take too much space. So all this, what we are doing, it has a very emotive approach, because we are questioning the facts. The facts, it means we have all the scientific, we are questioning, it's not that we are opposing, but we are adding the emotive side to the facts of losses of landscape. And we have all the data from scientists, all the extincted species, all the levels of pollution, all this is there. And there is no lawyer they can bring this into court, but it seems that it's not enough. So also it seems that climatologists don't have enough if they show the data in all the narratives of actually presenting the situation and getting empathy or even societal change is not enough. This is not that we think we are solving, but this is just our modest approach to see if actually we could replace facts by the meaningful relationships that people have with the river. So a way, because here we are talking about cartography and mapping, and I think we already explained, showed you, guided you a little bit yesterday, very briefly. But what we are actually trying to reach is the fact that even though we are all afraid to say we are indigenous to a certain territory, but what we are trying to say here is that we actually have tools in us to sense the territory as artists, as bureaucrats, as scientists, which are all also part of our Zenne Alliance, that we can sense the river differently in order to make a new cartography that proves as a fact. So we are trying to make a storytelling of a fabulative storytelling of a preamble for law, and not to say that we are not taking seriously, because we have also a lawyer that is working on the bill, and we are now forming alliances with the universities to support the work. So we have been these last 2 years really focused in growing an alliance or a group of people that is gathering and only know each other by water, because water memories or water stories, because we never introduce each other by who we are. If we are Benjamin doesn't say I am, okay, everybody knows by now who he is, but we unlearn also these roles. We only know the person who put the feet in the sea and had this cold feel refreshing. So actually we relate to each other by the memories they told. Oh, what's the name of this one? Ah, the one that had a memory there.
The one that took the vessel home
Yeah.
afterwards. Yeah.
So it's really about getting to know each other always through water, to unlearn all the other systems that are there. And so in fact, the point where we are now, to conclude, is this is very complex to explain now, but we actually want to bring four strands together. That is the walking with that we are doing, the digital archive that we want to bring in the walks that people can walk through the digital archive, and the Bill of Rights that actually all this comes the matter, the preamble, the proof of legitimacy, and that all together becomes an archive of the landscape as remembering this river through all what we have to learn and told to each other. Yeah. That's it. I don't know. You got something?
I think it'll come into questions.
Yeah. That is for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. I didn't show this picture, but you can still show. This was a moment where we brought everyone from,
Weaving the different territories together.
because we were walking territory by territory, and then one time we met in the Zenne River, and we invite everyone who has walked with us in June. Because the people from the source, I heard about that, but I never went there, so we tried to bring everyone together in one place. Yeah, that's it. For now we give the floor.
Are there very urgent questions at this point? You have an urgent question?
You want to leave?
I think I will keep them for
Yeah. Then maybe.
You also listen.
I think so. What is this?
That's a good interlude.
That's all good.
When you make the diaporama, it makes the music. Je voulais juste les jouer ensemble, mais peut-être que je les.
But if you open them all together, then you can do full screen.
When I select
All of them and then open them. Yeah. Double click.
Yes.
But then I cannot. I prepared actually a sort of a conduit to be clear. But let's say I can first introduce a little bit my relationship to the project called Sambre 2030, which has been initiated by Olivier Pestiaux. He's a friend, but he's also an artist. I think before COVID, probably I don't remember exactly when, but he decided to travel the river nearly from the source in France, or where it could be navigated with a boat, up to the confluence where the river is meeting the Maas, La Meuse, which then goes to Holland and to the North Sea. And that was a sort of shock for him, because he was on a small boat with a friend and understood that the river was completely invisible. And when he went through his own city where he grew up in Charleroi, where the embankment of the Sambre is so low, that he understood how the river was actually kind of negated, not on all the way, but for some parts it was really negated. So it's a river that has a particularity, because it's most probably the first river that has been completely embanked in Europe. And it's connected with its story because it was a kind of wide river. So that's what you're looking at, is not La Sambre. It's actually La Loire, I think, or I'm not even sure. I will come to this picture, which is quite nice, because if you look at this picture, it's like, as someone I will speak about in a few minutes, Gilles Saucier, a photographer, he says like it's like when the river looks at you, it's like an eye, like the island becomes a sort of eye for him of the river that is looking, it's the river looking towards you and not you towards the river. It's a picture from 1966 from the river. I think I think it's La Saône. I'm not even sure. It's the river that goes near in the north of France, near Reims. I'm not even sure now which one it is. But he sent this picture to me, like, to really speak about the inversion of the look from the river to the land, and how the river should speak for itself, also, but look for itself. So there's a whole discussion about how we should switch also from one idea of representation towards another one. So Olivier, who is this artist, started this trajectory and then made the first exhibition, and then understood, I think, by meeting somehow the work of that had been done around La Loire in France, that there was a complete other way to probably work and think about the river, or work with the river. And so yeah, I wanted to bring this this image, but I forgot. There's a book that has been published probably 3 years ago now, which is titled Le fleuve qui voulait écrire in French. So the river which wanted to write its own story. It has been published or signed by Camille de Toledo, who is an author, a French author, who has been reworking actually hearings that have been conducted by a collective of people around La Loire, with the idea of how could it be possible to gain a juridical person, a legal personhood status for the river. And they invited a lot of experts from the river, and also people who are thinking about this issue, among others, people like Bruno Latour, who was also part of that hearing committee. And what the Toledo did is actually reworked all the session into a book, let's say by chapters, and then by rephrasing things. And so it's an experiment in writing. This author is quite well known as an essayist and novelist, but actually he was trained in economy and in law and in art also, because he studied also photography and film. So he has a very interesting also, I would say, academic trajectory, which makes it quite sensitive to a lot of different issues. So the Toledo published this book in France 3-4 years ago, and I think that that's the moment probably where Olivier thought that maybe it might be interesting to things along those lines for Sambre, and he went on to imagine a kind of very ambitious project by organizing different groups of working groups. So I just try to present a little bit the way he has been working first before developing more, maybe you're presenting more ideas about the legal issues, because I thought we would more speak about that today, but maybe it's not the issue. So maybe it's really too detailed already what I had prepared. So let's see. But for artists, it's interesting to see how he has been working, because I think none of us as an artist would organize a project like that. I think it's still very tricky, and I am working with him more as an advisor at this stage. So I'm not really working as an artist producing, let's say, forms. I will go on a little bit later on my role so far. But Olivier has actually organized Sambre through 4 working groups. There is one that is actually dealing with jurisdiction, so it has more or less, I would say, nearly 10 people working in this group. The aim of the group is to meet 6 times in the between 23 and 24, 25, I think. So it's all these people are, let's say, mostly lawyers, philosophers of law, really people connected with law making or law thinking about law. So mostly lawyers. Maybe some people who are trained in law and sociology, or law and environment, or so some of them are mostly most of them are Belgian, so working in universities as teachers, and some of them are coming from France, and they are actually related to this project from La Loire. So 2 of the main people who are working with Olivier are actually 2 of the people who were accompanying also the Loire project. One of them is a woman called Marine Izquierdo, and she's also working for an organization which is called Notre Affaire à tous, so our, let's say, common struggle, or Cause Commune. There was an NGO in Belgium who was called Cause Commune in the 80s. So it's a little bit like an idea of you could translate it by a common cause or common business. And they were quite important in the media in 2018, because they attacked actually the French state for ecocide. So they attacked the state for non-action towards the climate crisis. So they gained a lot of attention in the media for this, because they were also quite successful. And they keep on working mostly on ideas about and around ecocide, and so the crime of ecocide. So she's actually advising and really sort of I could say a consultant for this project also. Juridical art working group, mostly meeting online. There's a socio-economic group which is supposed to bring together like the stakeholders, the big companies, the people working along the trajectory of the river. There's an artistic group which is supposed to think about how artists can and cultural worker can develop some action and some forms to actually achieve the goal of the project, which is to, as I said, to gain a legal status for the river by 2030. So because that's also the projection is that there will be there is also a favorable climate and perspective for achieving this by this term, let's say. And there's a fourth group that is actually non-existing so far, or really in a very primitive phase, which is the environmental working group. So you have every time like almost 10 people working in each group and meeting, and so Olivier is kind of coordinating all this. My role is that I came at some point to he approached me to help him to write his application for a research grant that most of us know. Some of us worked with this grant, which is called the Vracht, or the Research in Art. That is a funding that is connected to the National Research Fund in the French-speaking part of Belgium, but it's dedicated for artists who research. So I kind of help him to focus on this grant and to rewrite parts of it, and to open his proposal to a small collective working who would kind of work with him to develop a proposal. And that's where I actually advise to work with or to contact and to discuss with a photographer, French photographer, whose name is Gilles Saucier, who's the one who sent me this black and white picture that I mentioned, that I actually was not in touch with for many years, or more than 25 years. But I really thought about him when we discussed this, because he's someone whom I met in the late 90s and who had been working in Bangladesh with communities that are flooded every year, I would say, with the monsoon and the problem of water over there, because that's a country that really has a sort of scale that changes along the year. And some of the islands that actually are inhabited and cultivated, they don't necessarily exist for more than 1 year. So sometimes they have these parts of the territory, they have names for the people, but they don't necessarily exist for, maybe sometimes they only exist for 1 season. And so he worked with communities over there for years and years, but also he kept on nearly every photographic project that he did, is there the river that is passing through has some kind of presence in nearly all of his work. So I thought that it might be very interesting to discuss with him. He also is someone who is very interesting for me, because he's an artist who has been challenging the categories and the way we relate to documentary photography. He really he has a own story coming from reportage as a journalist, and to kind of completely block with his practice and redevelop it, rethink completely the way he was behaving and reflecting about all the condition of his work. So he also has been trained as an anthropologist, so he has this kind of double way of approaching things. And this is just a cover from I show this because it's a social science magazine that is quite well known in France, published by l'École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. That has been dedicated to the question of documentary through literature, photography, cinema. So I think the picture there is by the cineast from Cambodia, Retipan. And Gilles has an essay. So it's something from the late 90s, just showing. This is a document that Gilles used for writing the very first intention of why he would be interested to work on Sambre and along in this project. And it's actually a map. Some of you may know this map. Is a map of the Mississippi, and it's really showing how the river has been evolving. So it's in some way it's a fixed map, but it's very interesting because it's a map showing the life of a river, the shape it takes, and is really very it's an image that speaks for itself. And why I took this is also because the way that Gilles wants to approach the Sambre by practicing it now for coming and going and meeting people on the mission also is really about rethinking about this embankment of the river that has nothing to do with what the river was in the past, and in some way he speaks about all the ghosts of the river that are completely invisibilized today, and how he could kind of recreate something that speaks from where the river was. And we're going to see a few pictures also from one of the walks that Olivier organized. I think one in June, I was part of it. I don't know if I'm going to enter all the aspect here, but let's say so. This is I'm not following any text here, so I'm like improvising from let's say saying a little bit about the project, how it is organized. There are many developments that have been made so far because Olivier is connected with universities. So, for example, like 3-4 weeks ago, there were like universities from students, like 100 students from I think 5 or 6 universities in Europe, very different countries, who have come along the Sambre and really worked there for 1 full week. And really working with their teachers and developing some different strategies on how to relate to the river, so it's really like a project that has this kind of policy, I would say, that Olivier is giving this idea that the more people speak about it, the more everything is let's say the debate, the social public debate is contaminated by the issue, the best it is somehow. And I'm not really necessarily like sharing this way of working, but I just mention it because it's kind of strange. Whereas we would as artists mostly like concentrate on practice along a territory and then trying to work with in a small committee. So this happens, but there's also a super large framework, which is the idea of really creating something that structurally can keep on following and defending a position. So, of course, this is the very beginning of a project, and then after you meet all the actors who are institutionalized or that are stakeholders who are busy with the river. So one very important player in Belgium are les contrats de rivière. So every river, I don't know how it happens in Flanders, but I think because these issues are, of course, we enter directly a very institutional question is how a river, Sambre, is taking its source in France and entering Belgium. So it's already a transborder issue. But of course, we have also all these issues that are interrelated within our own country, and the rivers, they are actually connected with a region. So it's a regional matter. So the contracts, and maybe you know also because by working on the maybe it's also part of a contrat rivière, rivière contract.
Yes.
The stats so in
Zenne is also.
okay. Yes, and yes,
Yeah.
more probably
We are
there's
also
a.
working with them.
And so there is it's already like a complex body with organization that are like environmental organization. The mayors sometimes are representing their municipalities. So there it's already something that is quite complex, but it has no. It cannot. Yeah, it's quite limited as a power. It cannot give advices to the administration and to the politician, but it has no power of enforcing something really. I just show a few pictures to where we had a geographer for a walk that is actually not a walk; it's more like a cycle from Charleroi to Thuin. Quite interesting because we had this geographer who is a former university teacher who gave us a full not a full understanding, but a very interesting understanding of why Charleroi was built also where it is as a garnison, as a city, a military city, really late actually in the 17th century. So it's really a new city. And by doing this trajectory, also really explaining us why villages are where they are, why a monastery is there, and every time like giving a sort of reading of why the things are where they are. So yeah, it was actually a biking tour, just to give a few images of how the industry, the massive industry, is really at the center of Charleroi. There are many reasons for that, and of course, through geography, social geography, human geography, really, you can really go through all these layers. I just show also how there's a whole industrial heritage that is there, but also you come across factories that are still completely operating on the banks. Yeah, and how the river, once you leave Charleroi, looks more like something like the Zenne, maybe outside of Brussels or in the Vlaams Brabant. And in Thuin, it's a very interesting small city where they have a museum. So I just show a few images of that because it used to be a place where ships were being built in the past, and so the bateliers have come together to create actually a péniche, a boat where it has become a museum, where they have gathered all the souvenirs, the pictures, and it's very interesting aspect of it because you also see how the river has created like a community of builders of boats, but also a school that was set up in Namur. So to actually train the people. Very interesting maps also. This is a map where all the points where you can stop are actually on the rivers. In it's not only Sambre here. It's much wider. So tous les points de mouillage, as we say in French, where you can actually stop with a péniche. And as you know, is the rivers and have been designed also for the economy. So it's really related to the size of the boat and how the boat have been bigger and bigger, and how at some point the rivers were really framed to the size of this for transportation. So Sambre is actually here, and we see which rivers also come into La Sambre, and to what level also you can really start to think, as you mentioned, with the collection of water, like one of the first remark that Gilles did also is that to what extent La Sambre is La Sambre. So it could have been, it could have had even another name. Is how we decide the name and how all the affluents actually lose any kind of personality once they are part of the bigger river. So. So just a few traces from this museum. This image I think is really interesting because it's actually a strike by the boat keepers, by the owners and the workers, and they actually put their boat to block the river together. So one next to each other. So yeah. It's just these are just a few pictures, and I had actually more sort of as I said, a conduit to speak a little bit about the I wanted to quote also Camille de Toledo because I think it really relates to also how we were talking about the tool this afternoon. He said he was quoting a guy called Marc-Alain Ouaknin, a Jewish scholar, who pointed out that the edition of the Talmud produced by the printer Daniel Bomberg in Venice is inspired by the lagoon. As if the shape of the lagoon were a text, interwoven text, the various islands of Venice, fragments of a parchment. I love this correspondence between text and land, he says, giving birth to an additional layer of text, of writing. Being a writer, that's what we do. So it's the opposite of a clean slate, the opposite of the image of the author as it emerged with modernity, the blank page. The author who would create from nothing, from scratch, taking the place of the demiurge. We all still exegetes, I don't know if we use this in English, we are still exegetes of text that have been handed down to us. Yeah. So I thought it was interesting as a quote from de Toledo. He's also from a Jewish origin that is relating to this culture and to the idea of Venice also as a lagoon and as a collection of island and to a relation to document and to write from this perspective. So as in this this is a little bit the aim of the legal group is to change the aim of the project is to change the way we look at living things by tabling a bill to introduce into Belgian law the possibility of natural entities, and more specifically Sambre, to take legal action through its representative by the end of 2030. There are 4 lawyers here. It's interesting to see how they work really with a set of values, and the regulation is the 3 main questions is what is the best possible way of representing nature in Belgian law? In answering this question, we will have to answer the 3 following sub-questions. Why represent nature? Who should represent it? How should it be represented? So that's really how the legal team framed their role. I spoke about the 4 groups. These are people who are part of it. It's not necessarily interesting. There's I don't know if this is also the river contract. I spoke a little bit about it. There's a whole part about the international context also about natural entities and how let's say the landscape is moving really fast these last years and in different countries, and how is actually Europe also busy with this. So I spoke about Loire as a river and as an experimental also project that has been conducted over there. Maybe I just go through present a few lines from presentation that Marine did about the rights of nature that are currently recognized in almost 30 countries around the world. There are 3 legal ways of recognizing them. There is the constitution, and so possibilities to change a constitution, like Ecuador did in 2008 for a river. that has been protected. But there in Ecuador, it's part of the constitution, but then there's a problem of actually practicing this law is like really implementing it in the daily routine, I would say, of justice. So it's there, but it's not really activated. There's a second legislative route, which is the legislative route, like in New Zealand for rivers and in Spain for Laguna, Mar Menor. That is really like a sort of focus point for a lot of project today. And then there is the jurisprudence, so judicial activism. And then 2 examples there in Colombia and India. And then there are 3 cultural ways of recognizing them based on a concept that has been developed by a philosopher who's been thinking about legal animism and following the ideas of Philippe Descola, so the French anthropologist. And she has made like 3 categories. One is indigenous-based legal animism, like in Colombia. Another is legal animism with a sacred or religious basis, like in India. So it's the way you actually call or invoke the reason to change the law. And the third one is our supposedly as realist way is a scientific-based legal animism, which is also quite funny that she speaks about legal animism. That would be the characteristic of our Western legal system. So yeah, in France, it's a few advances. You all remember the Erika case. So it's this huge petrol boat who collapsed in 2012 in the sea. So there is the first time there was a recognition of an ecological damage by the courts, and then in the civil code in 2016. So yeah, I don't know if it's interesting to go in because it's already quite detailed, but it's showing where for example, where the animals are also now embedded into what kind of protection they have. And how this could be a challenge. So there are different routes that could be used. And then there's a whole history of legislation where rights of nature have been recognized already and where they are. So all these lawyers, of course, they're following this very carefully. So here we have a lot of example. I'm not sure it's really interesting to go through all this, but let's say that one of the big achievements so far in Europe is that Spain has passed a law in 2022 recognizing the legal personality for the Mar Menor, which is a laguna. So in France, as I said, Notre Affaire à tous, this group for which Marine is working, is really following different and advising different groups. There's a river in Corsica also, who they are really working with people over there to protect it, and it has actually went different stages and is quite far actually in the process. But it keeps on being something that needs to be followed up on a daily basis. I think I wanted to highlight a sort of conversation. So I just took this from a report because it would speak to some of us as we've been working on legal issue also the past year. And one of the thinker that we found interesting and that we have read and commented during, I think, some reading room also, is a French philosopher, Sarah Van Uxem. And I just take this small part, maybe I enlarge it so that we can read it, where one researcher from these groups asked after the presentation, what do you think of the work of the law on the law of the commons by Sarah Van Uxem, a French jurist, which aims to demonstrate that there is no need to protect natural entities, to give them legal personality. Things can have rights, in particular through the law of easement. So in French, it's les servitudes, actually, I would say. For example, the atmosphere has rights over a particular oil reserve. And Marine answer, one does not preclude the other. The law of the commons, this means exempting nature from the right of ownership, whether private or public. There are additional benefits to legal personality, creating another framework for governance with greater citizen participation and strengthening of local environmental democracy and the ability for guardians to take legal action. So here it's maybe, I don't know if it's too pedagogical or if it's interesting or not, but I can speak a little bit about, this, the question of entities and to what level it's interesting or not. But here we can see there are actually two, for me, as I have understood also in the legal group and in the discussion I had already with her, with Marine, is that I think there are two very big families of behaving towards this. You have the family of the commons, I think, and then you have the family of the lawyer who are really defending this idea that it has to go through juridical personhood, and why. And so that's why I try to understand also a little bit, and I try to make it really simple here, and maybe it's really too simple, but I think it's try to summarize for you also is also maybe first why I wanted to introduce photography in this artistic dimension is for me it relates to what we have called in France la mission photographique. Photographic mission in France is really like a sort of thing that has been implemented since the 80s to have photographer working on territories in order to register them and really to coordinate a mission. Is like you commission a lot of photographer to really work on a specific territory. I think it's also very much in their culture, is connected with photography as one of the main media that France wanted to create its own territory because they wanted to claim the invention of photography. So they had to put a lot of money to say we are the inventor of photography. And this is really a cultural thing, very important in the artistic field to understand that it's very different from here. And it has created a sort of, it's a whole culture. It's a culture in itself. And Gilles is kind of challenging this also, all this culture of the mission photographique, the Observatoire du Paysage, now they call this Observatoire du Paysage. What I forgot to say is that Gilles is not only a photographer, but he's also a gardener. And he brings this kind of, he's challenging also his photographic practice through relating to plants. And so along the river, he has been taking plants and bringing them and back in France and growing them, and probably will come with an idea of doing something with it. I don't know. But in my idea is also that if you want to try to write a declaration, and if you go into writing law, let's say, you should never forget that it's more like a sort of thought that I have also, that it's always law is always dealing with fiction, right? It's completely rooted into fiction. And when I refer to this as a tradition relating law and fiction, I'm relating mostly to Vico, to Giambattista Vico, Italian thinker from the 18th century, who is the author of a book called The Origin of Poetry and Law. And I just took a quote also from Vico so that you understand a little bit. Of course, it's framed in the 19th century, very, very early 19th century, so 1800. But he wrote that all jurisprudence is based on reason and authority, and seeks through them to bring existing law into line with the facts. Okay, so there's also this movement is bringing law into line with the facts. Reason stems from the necessity of nature and authority from the will of the powerful. Philosophy pursues the necessary causes. History is the testimony of the will. We can discuss all these phrases, but he brings together here three scenes together. So philosophy, history, and law. This is why universal jurisprudence must be seen to have three components: philosophy, history, and this particular art of matching law to fact. So he was the one who actually kind of claimed a common ground for this, and related to the power of language, of course, and then to the roots of to the use of language as a common ground for all these matters. So for me, is also photography not only as a tool to map a territory, but because of course it has been a proven tool to make things visible for a very large audience, but also because I think that it might be interesting to challenge the writing of a declaration with different levels, among which photography might be a part. But it's like to challenge really the writing of law as a form that might be challenged by different ways of writing, different takes that could come. Photography being possibly one of them. Yeah. So when we relate to entities, I wanted just to introduce maybe these two things about entities and personality, because we mentioned this with Ronnie also when we were working this afternoon. But entities, you could also, to make it a little bit clearer, you could also try to classify entities in at least the lawyers or the philosophers, they try to do this, different types of non-human subjects. So the non-human relational subject, that would be Sambre, would be an example of that, a river. The collective non-human subject, that would be bees, for example, to give an example, like a colony of bees, be a collective and non-human subject. And you could have also the individual non-human subject, for example, a particular animal living around the river. So for the question of personality, only to understand this is quite important, is a legal personality. You need a legal personality to embody an entity in law. So it's a very basic principle. A person is an entity with rights in law, right? So a person is an entity with rights. So that's the practical and technical dimension. And to understand this is also that we have to understand that in the 19th century, association, interest groups, commercial companies, they had no status. So we spoke about the moral personhood this afternoon. They had no status at the outset. So there was a jungle at some point, and the lawyers, they had to invent a new fiction, and this new fiction would be called Société Anonyme, or would be called Société Coopérative. Or so these are very, very recent fictions that have been invented to become pragmatic and to make things possible, and to escape from legal conflict that were happening and that would be unsolvable. We have to remember that it's very new. All these fictions are very new. And to give another understanding of what a fiction is, also to give a very simple example, because there's so many, but because you could say, yeah, but the Société Coopérative is more than a fiction. But another good example that I like is given by a very important French philosopher of law, probably the most important from the 20th century, who died a few years ago. Jan Thomas has been really working on this dimension of how fiction has been created by law by the Roman, during the Roman Empire. And one of the examples that he showed is at some point, one emperor had no son, and he wanted to pass over the power. So the problem was, of course, that it was not feasible. So that's the moment where during the Roman Empire the lawyers from that time invented the idea of how would you say it in English, adoption, actually. Adoption not as we know it, but it's how someone who you're not the father, the biological father, you become the father of someone you're not a parent with. This is an amazing fiction, is a tremendous fiction, but it was invented by them at that time. And so there are many things that happen like that, and so it helps us to reconfigure and then maybe to think that how things can be implemented by being completely fantasies, actually. And then we go into maybe but maybe another detail is the question of asset, because also we always speak about the tool and the tool being the asset, and or what are the assets, and when you work in non-monetized economy or as we do as artists sometimes, is also one of the things that it is important to understand, is that creating a legal person implies creating assets. So in law, asset corresponds to the personal development, which means also the potential of a legal person. So it's also interesting to see that how it works on this level. I don't want to go further, but just to I am maybe just for the very last thing is the right and duties is also interesting, because we mentioned or at least I spoke about dinosaur yesterday. Is that is also interesting to understand that in our system in the Western world there is this question of rights and duties, but it's not applicable necessarily in the US. So it's not because you have rights that you have duties. And one of the examples in the US, with us, it's always working. The one thing I wanted to bring today is also that the problem arises for the AI with the robots, because the robot is a man-made entity with the power to act in its own right. And as there is no legislation for the moment to control this, there is maybe the idea that the robot could be a subject of right with obligation and with no rights. That is maybe a way to protect us from the AI is to only have obligation for the robots and not and no rights, actually. But we're far from some here.
I was thinking, I want to go back to the river now.
So yeah, the ambition there is really high, in the sense that they want to achieve they want to push it to that level without being funded, which is mostly now working with people who are very committed, and mostly people who are already paid by the university or by association or by organization. And the funny thing is that the artist is animating Olivier all this for 2 years on a very with an artist status and with a small books and a few thousands here and there. But yeah, so it needs to be channeled by different funding. One of the expectation is at this moment is that the project has been encapsulated in Namur 2030. There are different cities who try to become a cultural capital, and one of the expectation is to maybe to get some funding through this, but it's far, so that needs to be financed by another. So there are different ideas of trying to fund it somehow. but I think it would be very interesting, of course, for you to meet and to discuss. And of course, you have told me that you met one of the actor of the group is the Christine, who is actually the head of the Loki in Louvain-la-Neuve on the Faculty of Architecture, and she's really integrated also and bring her students and all the network with the 5-6 universities is actually Christine who brought this. She's really active also,
She's
really into it. And so there are many allies there that bring a lot of energy to the depth and brief to the project. So it's interesting that she contacted you also. So there's a lot to discuss for you. There's also something that is now being pushed by Camille de Toledo. Is let's say a step further for him is working on the idea of an international des rivières. So bringing different projects that are connecting all these people working, taking care and developing practice around rivers around the world actually. So it would be something that could kind of bring all these energies together in order to fight at a level that is supranational. So there's something that is working on now. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any thoughts or questions?
Are there questions coming from this?
I don't think there is. I don't think there's no one.
I think it's just us.
Yeah. We are hoping someone will bring a question.
Yeah, I was wondering about with the project of the Zenne and the work you are doing there, because this question of cartography actually comes at the end of your presentation, and before there's a lot of ways of trying to embody a kind of relationship with the river, which is let's say it's something in the doing. And well, historically cartography has been the means of kind of possessing or like and stabilizing an entity that is in a movement. And so I was wondering how you think about dealing with this kind of schizophrenic relationship through cartography and the river, because I mean a lot of the work for it seems that you do is kind of getting again in relationship, and as such doing it in an embodied way, which seems so contradictory to the practice of cartography, which is kind of way of tracing and seizing something. So I was wondering how you imagine this kind of idea of cartography from this embodied practice.
I can speak a little bit. Actually, maybe we don't explain everything very well, but we start from marking. We do scripts for the river, and maybe let's explain. Go backwards. When we were in Rhône River, we actually were more like that. We were just trying to map relationship to things, and then at the end we did a preamble. So we were trying to fit a preamble into all what we have harvested from the walking with. But now we actually have a completely different system, that we have already a system of archiving. So we have, like for each walk we have done, we have already set categories that we are filling in all the time. And also the walks are already responding what we were missing in the preamble that we our first attempt to do a preamble in the Rhône River. So maybe it's not so clear that we actually already have beforehand what we want to do in the territory as a cartography of mapping the landscape, but we actually have already define before we do the walking with.
Mm.
So maybe it's not so clear in the. I even have a drawing here if I can.
So what happens when the walking with ends up in another category that you did not foresee? Do you adjust that, or
Our scripts are the cartography of the territory, but maybe
Like this.
maybe I can show you. Yeah, but you can if you want to explain.
I mean, I understand the question. I don't know if I can answer it.
For example, this is a
But there
script.
is also something about this idea. What's coming a lot for me now is, of course, this relationality that we're discovering, and that is, it happens in the doing of it. But and somehow also these stories also for me start to become somehow a little bit also a kind of cartography of the river, and this passing on of stories and retelling of stories. And remembering the stories of others. Oh yeah, and he said that. Oh yeah, and then she said this. And actually that also now starts for me to have some kind of way of mapping river relations. I mean, as I was saying, we're really trying to dissolve the idea of the river as a line. And that I don't know if this speaks at all to your question,
But in fact, the scripts are the cartography in some kind of way, because we start from the points that we want to map in the territory, whether it's an emotion or it's a sensory attention, whether it's to hear what the landscape or observe something in the landscape, because it takes us at least we go 6 times to the same territory to develop the script. Then we are always referring also, like if we meet Jeff, the lawyer, we actually ask him, what do you need for the preamble? And then we go back to our script, and then we try to have a sensory score that can give us material that can be fed into the definition of what a river is. So it's it's a kind of braiding of the preamble, the sensorial cartography, and the embodied experience. But we don't know yet how to share this because it's a quite complex braiding, and maybe sometimes I feel we are still finding a way in which we can share or even present the if you look at this, it's kind of what we are trying to do with the 3 different.
Yeah, there's a relationship.
But it's still a bit difficult for us or challenging to explain the braiding.
But this is also what I mean. Like we set up these conditions of attention in the territory, and then the attention, what comes is the stories of the people. So it's how they notice, how they describe the river, how they notice the birds, the kind of the texture of the grass, what the memories that they have. So all of these sensory attentions and memories and stories emerge through the stories of the people. So it is in that kind of the script shapes the potentiality for those relationships to appear. But they get held somewhere. What your cartography? How are they held? How are they mapped? And is it in the vessel, or is it in the vessel of the people and their memory, or is it something we write down? This is
Because then when you say share and you make the movement to a digital space, then it becomes...
Because we actually want the digital space to become the preamble, which we are still figuring out how that can be. That actually, when we deliver the bill to the parliament, that actually the preamble can be lived, so we call living bill in the territory, so people can rewalk the walk of the river, and they can have access to the aspects that tells who is this identity through the memories that were already shared with this group that walks with us now for 2 years.
What is a stupid question, but what is a living bill in Dutch?
Well, it doesn't exist, this word. You have bill, but
Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights, but we call it living because we actually do not want to repeat the same way in which a bill is brought in terms of legal approach.
And the Bill of Rights is
The living
document, or how should you say?
Bill of Rights is like a chart, or
Declaration of
like the old way of the
Like
former legal system before law was
It's
implemented.
like a placard.
or a declaration of
The bill is like a poster, and
And is it the first time you're making this, or did you make it already for another river as well?
we did an attempt for Runner River, but there we only walked, and at the end, let's make the preamble. Now, from what we experienced there, we create first the structure and the response to what we need to put on a preamble, and then we design the scripts for the walk. So we are now a step further. We are still practicing.
And will it be like really long, or how
But
much
it's
shape
not
is
about
it?
the text. It's not
Yeah,
text.
okay,
The view is the walk
It's
through
that,
the
okay.
river.
Yeah.
It is a living. So you will experience the view through walking the territory.
And
And I think it's just,
It's
it's what Vincent's also talking about, like the idea that you open up to the inclusion of the people who actually will, the citizen participation in law, because you're talking about how these laws, they're only effective if somebody enforces them. And they're only, that you need actually people to care about the river, that the bill actually becomes a tool that is useful, and that's through creating engagement. That's also why we call it living bill. It's not something that's just only in a
Not a
paper or
paper.
only in a
Eventually there will
court.
be a paper, but
And actually, I think our idea would be that the bill is, like, maybe I say our, but like for me, the idea is that you develop relationships with the river to such an extent that a bill is redundant. That it's actually a tool for restoring relations rather than an end product. And once we have a bill, the relationship will be
Yeah, but
fine.
let's say that's what I try to say when I think for me, as far as I understand the way, because what I like to when I hear you is I think that the project around Sambre is really for me very much so far as it's implemented, as it's why I say it's really very different from how we used to work, is that it's really experimented through, for the moment, is really expert working together. And of course, there are some walks, there are things happening, there are students coming and things, but there is not yet, except for Gilles, who is doing this work for him, for the project, but on his a very personal level at this moment. Um, so going through things, making walks, making also connection, and Olivier did a lot of connection or introducing to some other people, but it's not that Olivier has the time to produce or takes the time to produce something artistically, or he has no time for this, so because there's too much coordination, too much. And so the question is also at some point, this as an expectation is more like in the tradition of the commons, that how to reinstall something through a community and guardians, stewardship, and things like that. And then you have the other version for me was like how the lawyers are working now specialize in nature rights and things like that, who maybe they don't agree also all of them, but that they go for the juridical person, because then it allows the river to defend itself before the court. But then there are so many questions that come with it, because who is going to represent the river? And when you speak about the stakeholders, of course, it's not about only activists and lovers of the river. You have, of course, in the stakeholders, you have the mining company who's there. The polluter are also there, and they will make everything possible to gain the maximum voice. And of course, they are much more connected to politicians than the activists. So in some way, it's a very tricky thing and you don't know unless you try. But I think there is a way that is, let's say, again, representative democracy. If it's that sort of thing that we're living in already, is like, how can we challenge this also? So there is something in between, maybe the two, and that's what Sarah Van Uxem is actually saying. We don't need this. So it would be interesting to have her to speak also, develop a little bit more.
Yeah, it would be amazing to because for us it's like we don't separate. Our way of working is that we don't put the lawyers doing their job and then we come with a project to affiliate with that, with what they do. The lawyer is part of our group and we kind of challenge the ways in which law or unlearn ways in which laws have been
So
made.
that's what is, I think,
So it's
problematic.
more like we are an organism that is thinking together. The same way as restorative justice comes, but law, what is this law doing? I don't believe in law. Like Bruno would say, I don't believe in any law. Like I don't believe that we put prisoners in jail and they have a punishment, and this is not a system that we believe in. So it's like there are also these frictions that makes the possibility to reimagine or question actually the legal system, because we have a critical approach to the legal system, not
of course, but so it's really depending on how you, where you want to achieve and what kind of pragmatics you're into. So here is it's not that I'm much more I think affiliated to this way of behaving, and I think that separating the group is also a very strange thing, because it creates this kind of expertise without the transversal thing. And of course they are specialists, so they really know when they speak about a river what is a river, but it's the way you channel a river, you relate to a river, has nothing to do with how they relate to a river.
But that's also they are designing the laws from their offices. So what we try to do is that they come. Marine Calme, she's like this lawyer. She was with us for 2 years, and a lot of times she was saying, "I'm wasting my time here," because. But really, and sometimes I was really offended. Like she would come for a residency, and we would be exchanging and questioning. And for her, this how artists are actually working was not efficient for her, because she wants to make the law pass. She wants to convince the politicians, and now she's actually in Paris trying to give legal personality to the Senne River and doing really like real courts. And for her, it is the way, because this is all the tools they have to change the law. So it is an interesting dialogue, also having someone that is really like that with us to learn, also because she was critical about all the movements. Mar Menor, she had like all this that you were showing, she showed this to us, she was criticizing this was missing, that was missing, this was not working. So, it's also like, was very interesting to work with a lawyer like this, to see also the challenges that they face, because to open up for artistic process, it's still like really
it's friction, a lot of friction.
But if I can add to that,
or disbelief, because we do not have legitimacy the same way as they think they have the legitimacy.
No, but there's two things also. The system of value is completely different, and then the problem is that the politics that are embedded into the various options are very different. And so far, for me, I think it's still not really on the. This is really not on the table. But you wanted.
Well, there's another side of the coin that also we have people that walk with us that are in water management, let's say, and they started to do that kind of job because they like nature. Do you know what I mean? But then through the job, nature has turned into a bureaucracy. So also the lens with which you're looking at the river shapes how you see it. So they actually forget the personal. And then you can also, we did this a lot in Rona. We worked with people from the water management who had actually never seen parts of the river. And by reconnecting them with their personal relationship with the river, that's also another way to shift this kind of dynamic of who gets to speak for, what kind of voice is legitimate, what kind of language is legitimate in this debate.
But also to say that our project was sold as team building, not as like we are doing something together and learning each other. Was the only way to bring this into the office. So it's really like the legitimacy as artists, like these guys will never pass a law, like what.
But after a day as today, when we are working on this tool, I wonder if a digital interface or digital infrastructure helps this legitimacy. Would be nice to ask your lawyer what she thinks of.
Yeah.
I think that's linked also with this legal fiction
Yeah.
part. It's like with technology, you can enforce things by somehow bypassing this law because there's a need or there's a fiction is there. But yeah, of course, the fiction is also includes certain things and changes it in a way that's also questionable. Is it where will it go? Because it adapts the law to facts, but it can also change the facts to a certain aim. And I don't know if that's something probably you thought about, like what will happen once the legal personhood is there? How can it improve?
Yeah, I think it's really a long process, like you say, already 2030. We know for some
For some, they already.
for us, like of course, we also work with very few subsidy. Like we first had only until next year. Now we already say that is until 2027 without knowing if there is anything that can support our work. But it's really about. I was last year in Mar Menor, and Teresa, the lawyer who passed the law, she was saying, she was actually very angry in the conference room, saying, we made it, like we are the first country in Europe who made this law pass, but now we have to act as guardians. And there was they have like, I don't know, maybe 20 something cases that are piling of trials. And one NGO just stand up and said, actually, I didn't realize that once this law would be passed, I am the tutor of Mar Menor, and I got the custodianship of this body of water, and now forever, I mean, it is a life commitment. So I think for us, what we are also questioning or trying is like, how can we create this relationship that it is durable? Like in New Zealand, it took them 100 years to actually recognize. I mean, we started 3 years ago, you started 2 years ago. I mean, even if we manage to have like in 5 years this law, can we imagine that we will be working with the Zenne River for 50 years, like as long as we are here standing?
This is what you do.
It's a big question, no?
Yeah.
Like,
But
Of course, it's
in that way, I don't think this word team building is so bad. Because you actually team up with the river.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's-
true. Team building.
And by having this attention to the river, you feel the necessity of protecting it.
I like it. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but the team building refers to the company and not to the river.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
problem.
I think
You were
subversion
not
is another
convinced.
way.
You could.
But I think that's
all other
yeah, that's the
agents,
most
yeah.
important dimension of this project. At very first is the very first thing is to reconnect with the elements, and the river being one element
Yeah.
to get a new understanding of what we speak. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
because otherwise it's of course even me, I'm not so much committed to the ground as I would say that Gilles has been working much more. Although I didn't say, but I grew up next to the Sambre. That's why I actually also decided to accept the invitation to work and to help him, to help Olivier to think about it, because I grew up like really like the
Nice.
Sambre is 100 meters from my home, and I used to spend a lot of time watching birds when I was young, so I knew like part of the territory quite well, and yes, because it's connected to my experience that I do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't. But it's true that, yeah, when you see an artist like entering such a huge project, yeah, one of the big questions is, yeah, but what is the okay? That's the aim. Like, it's so the objective is already like in so many years,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's defining. It's like deciding to define something for your work for 10 years, and yeah, it's like it's really strange for me also to.
No, I understand. But I also, about this digital thing, like Rona River had a really strong alliance of people called, how was it again? Rona, yeah. No, it was Gardien du Rhône, and you.
Gardien du Rhône.
Yeah, maybe you heard of it. It was also a big movement. They were doing assemblies every year. Like this, it's happening a lot in France, and it's quite strong movement with Garn and all these rights of nature. But we also worked with some people of this group. They came for our walks also, but a bit like, team building. I don't know.
Yeah, but exchanging.
I don't know,
it's
exchange
interesting.
also. And what struck us as also in thinking of the digital platform was that there they have a petition. So if you still want to make a campaign for the Bill of Rights, you somehow have to have some kind of visibility, come to the news, campaign, blah, blah. We are in the process of starting to imagine that after this very sensitive process in the landscape, but eventually you need to get there if you really want this to move to. And so what was there was that they have really like this. Do you want to become a Rona Guardian? Click here. So the act of becoming a guardian was just to click the petition and you become a guardian, so you get numbers for the petition. And so here what we are also like trying to think is how can these people have an embodied relationship and then become a guardian and maybe click somewhere or write somewhere, or you see? So it's also like this approach that is very distant, from what the river is. Like you cannot click and become a guardian. Like how are we? You understand what I mean?
Yeah, it makes me think a bit in this book that Vincent mentioned of Camille de Toledo. In one of the audiences, they have a discussion about the case in New Zealand, which was brought forward by indigenous people that whose livelihood depended on the river.
Yeah, exactly.
And basically, if the river dies, they die. Yeah. Which is very different from the situation in a lot of Western context, where this relationship that if the river dies, we die, is not so evident, and this embodied relationship is completely different. So this question of custodianship is also incomparable because we don't have that connection anymore. And
it's not even dying, because I was at first presentation,
very first, right,
of Olivier in Charleroi.
But the very first.
And there was a person who actually worked on this New Zealand river. And what struck me was actually that for the indigenous people of New Zealand, this was not an ecological question. It was a political question. It was actually how do you define life? What is living, and what is the world we are living in, and what is our relation to that world? Since we're all a part of capitalist communities, this is about 180 degrees different. So for them, giving legal personhood to the river is about this 180 degrees change in terms of our relationship with our environment. So it's nothing to do with green political parties, nature, whatsoever.
It's also very connected to colonial history there.
Totally.
It's really like a sort of a battle with.
And in that sense, of course, what I find intriguing in looking for legal personhood for a river is not a question of guardianship, but actually the potential of fighting or using the law as the proper tool to fight actually those who use the law to obtain what we resist. So there was a certain moment that I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's just inverse relations. Well, you can do the same with tools, I think. And that's
the story with when I said the Société Anonyme or the invention.
That's the story.
And now we need to rebalance this, and that's why people think that there is a sort of momentum that it becomes possible. But what is so interesting is that actually it's the translation of the motto that is always seen as a militant motto, that le droit est fait pour les riches or par les riches pour les. Yeah, but it's so true, because you can see that only when a society is maybe a little bit of disbalance and really challenging the hegemony of the majority, that it can maybe use the tool back. But there is a moment where it's possible, but there's a lot of moments where it's not possible.
It's challenging not the majority, it's challenging the minority.
The minority,
excuse me.
But
And
let's say that installs the regime for the majority.
But again, going back to New Zealand, because I find that very inspiring, sorry.
Me too.
They have this, when they do the rugby, there's this dance, what's in it? The haka. Recently, there was this young lady, the youngest parliamentarian in New Zealand Parliament, a Maori woman, and they were actually trying to push forward a bill that took away certain rights of the Maori people. And she did an opening speech, and she actually resisted that by doing this haka.
Yeah. Have you seen this?
That was incredible.
The first time in Parliament.
It's incredible. But actually, what it means is she's a lawyer.
Yeah.
And she knows the laws, and she actually uses a different speech to enact this law. And then you should have seen the response, the reactions on microphone of the conservative parliamentary members. They said, well, if they really want to be so aggressive in parliament, then they should go back to the Bruce. Really, it's 2024. So that means that they touch a very sensitive point. They're right, because they are able to use the tool against the, let's say, oppressors who actually have used that tool. And for the Sambre, it's really also this meeting that I attended. All of a sudden, the question was gliding into a kind of retribution, because it is indeed about the embankment. And the embankment is not about embanking the river, it is about instrumentalizing the river for industrial development in the 19th century, coal and steel. And then all of a sudden the question was, but who's going to pay for all this? Opening up the river again and making the river Sambre a natural environment again, because now it's all about a kind of gentrifying movement, making clean parks along the river, making them accessible, like we do in Brussels, actually. But the thing is actually, the question was actually that the embankment of the Sambre was never a decision that was taken by society.
Yes.
It was taken by a number of individuals who saw a great accumulation of value and wealth possible by doing so. And then all of a sudden we all are responsible. No, you were responsible, so your family heritage should pay for the cleanup. So it became very argumental in this meeting, which was well attended. There was 70 people there. So it's quite challenging. And again, you have this same, it's almost colonial, but for me, colonial also has to do that we're all colonized by capitalism. It's not about race or gender. It's actually about economics. And I think in that sense, the legal part is really important, because economics, politics, and law, they're really, it's an interesting triangulation of value and value systems. So.
Well, also happened once that with one of the big lakes in America, Lake Erie, I think, I don't remember, that received also this legal status, but then the factories and the farmers around it started suing the guardians because they said, this is a loss of my of the value of my income, I can't live anymore. So they started suing the people, and then it all fell apart because they couldn't afford all these legal cases.
Yeah, it was the same yesterday. Someone was telling about a law that was passed in California against the building of new housing, and then that it was like a utopian achievement that they have so many laws to achieve that, and that now the minority and poor people do not have housing because of so many laws that have been passed to actually not build houses. So it is interesting also how law can shift and goes more.
Well, it's a fiction, as you said.
No, this
but
is
a
not
fiction with real consequences.
I was in a fiction literature conference, but it was also about real facts.
Well, the fact that it's fictional.
I think, yeah.
Any more? Or maybe we take the last questions to the bar.
Yeah, with the beer. No, but it was. I'm very happy to also see your presentation and hear more.
Yeah, it's very in some way very abstracted, but I wanted to try to bring a few elements to, because we need actually we see how, you know, the lawyers are really things with abstraction, but they have so much consequences. And when you said, yeah, the people should, you know, the families should pay for that, but of course they use all these other tools that have been invented for them, the société and that are of course, and that are protecting individuals to crash or to, and also protect the society for the crashes of I mean
But that's why it's so intriguing that this Société Anonyme and Société Coöperatieve, they have similar founding grounds. De samenwerkende maatschappij en de anonieme, de naamloze vennootschap. It's the opposite. And they exist side by side.
Société à responsabilité limitée. So, yeah, what I find intriguing is that, yeah, we hardly can imagine that the world we're living in, that is so much in transformation also, of course, but that most of the things we're taking for granted and operating with on a daily basis are fiction, are modern fiction, that most of them dated from 1800. Not so it's really like we are living in a society that has been completely framed 200 years ago, for the most part, and all the tools that are operating, we're operating with the legal tools, and the science we're dealing with, the concept we refer to, all that. And what it means is that also we have lost exactly what you're dealing with, and that's what I find really interesting to hear you also today, is that, and I think that is so much needed with Sambre, is how to reconnect with the elemental, I would say, like with the very elemental aspect of things, which has been completely we miss the experience. We miss the experience because we don't know how to relate really, like in a way that is not channeled by all these thinking, framing concepts and or status categories that have been implemented and that we have been living through. So yeah, it's maybe a little bit animistic also, but it's I think it's really it's really what is needed is that, and that's what we like also.
Vincent, that really connects to our first reading on Fred Dewey. The pressure of the socius, of the society, actually, because there are so many incorporated values that kind of format us, that frame us without being transparent or visible, that we don't realize that are there.
But even this word that you use now, you know,
sorry,
no, social and society, it's framed in the years 1800. Even that. So we use this as concept always, but actually they've been framed not so long ago, and they still operative. Actually, what is a society? What is the socius or the social?
I can't answer that question, but what I wanted to share was that we experience that's the loss that people have in a really visceral way. Like as we walk with people and as we talk, we bring up the memories and the stories of places that they've lost. Yes, sometimes actually the absence of connection, the absence of an ability to make a connection because it's been covered or taken away or polluted or whatever, is so present in people, like, and this grief for that I can't, that the grieving for the lack of a relationship is just as strong as the grieving that people have for a landscape that was lost, that it becomes really apparent that what we're talking about is really present in people. It's not a, it's really there. Like, yeah.
And maybe I would like to say something as no, as last Friday I met Christine, that is also, she was really advocating for La Sambre, and at the end of our talk we realized that we are actually coming from different sides. We come from the emotive, and there it's like really like law. I mean, you are really working for the law, even though it starts from the
No, this is a presentation I
Yeah.
did today because I know we connected
but
to
also
that.
her approach was
But
very much
she's an architect,
yeah, anyhow.
an urbanist.
But what I want to say is that the waters touch each other, and if we want to pass the Bill of Rights in the Parliament, is that maybe we have to be in solidarity with each other and come together, you know, to
Definitely.
learn and to try to make it happen
Mhm.
as the first rivers that get recognized in Belgium. I mean,
Of course.
we should not work separately.
No, of course.
And if there's anyone that wants to join our alliance, please,
Click
you
here.
are very welcome. We want more artists because we want to prove that art can change the world. So we want more artists thinking with us how we can do that together.
Platforms in the
Yeah,
making.
but
Platforms in the making.
Yeah, exactly.
For that.
Still more
No,
to
but
We have done
more years.
No, we would love to have
Yeah.
more thinking with us, because it is like we do not want just to bring the law. We want to prove that art can change the world. So it's through art you can.
And there's a sign that there's many things moving. Huh? So
Philip,
Yeah. Have you probably have also visited the Zenne garden?
Yeah, they are part of our alliance.
Yeah. So because I'm part of a collective École Mondiale with Yves van Bostraat,
we know
who did this nursery at the Zenne garden, and then he wanted to upscale it as well to have all these plants for the phytoremediation along the Zenne. So he went to talk with a lot of these companies, a lot of CEOs. Wow, it's an interesting project, and he just asked like some funding for the nursery, and it always like ended up like, but it's for us too expensive, or it's not possible, or not realistic, etc. So this was one part, and then to come back to the more animistic part of it, because Yves proposed always quite controversial things, and we had like 320 crystals charged in the sources of the Zenne. And he made, because when you took the water, he made an elixir out of the Zenne water. And
Elixir d'Anvers.
we also had a hot tub with this elixir in it, and you could bath. It was at the Dudepark, so you could really be in this embodied water. And so all the crystals, they are buried in Brussels in a grid. So it's a grid. Yeah, it's a complete structure. We did, and he was calculated it. So it started in Drogenbos. It goes completely to the other side of Le Marais de Ganshoren. So it's a triangle in Brussels of 320 crystals buried in between 40 centimeters and 1 meter depth. And it's his methodology is called Gaiagraphy. So it's this connection to the earth, actually. And I always encouraged him to do a PhD in Gaiagraphy, because probably there are schools of Gaiagraphers. Because, like all these kind of things to invent, actually.
My rejected PhD.
Another rejected.
But then when Bas Smets created the architectural biennial, and he proposed so many beautiful ideas of the secondary river valleys in Brussels, and how you could attach urbanistic planning to it. And I went to talk with him, and he was looking, and I explaining the grid and the crystals, and we charged it, and he was like, and the Leuven, they give money for this esoteric bullshit. I was like, yeah, they give money. Yeah, we're lucky. Yeah. But I like there again, like, yeah, it's not taken serious. This kind of approaches, and then we did a similar project in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, and actually the dean of the anthropology department or the faculty, he was like, wow, yes, and he designed the whole grid, and he was like because people, using crystals, and we use the crystals like this memory of the water and how traumatized is the cell memory of that water, etc. And I like to heal also. It was after the attacks in Brussels, and like we had this whole grid, and Eve still believes that if you join with people, you can recharge that grid that is buried in
But we
Brussels.
should redo this as a reactivation.
That's an open proposition.
It would be
I'm sure you will get
you can
along
bring
with
the
Eve.
alliance to do.
Yes.
I mean, it would be amazing.
Yeah.
We Eve was one of the first people we met like 4 years ago, but he
Yes.
did not told us this story. he only told the story of the Fitori Mediation Gardens, but he never told us the crystal.
It's a secret story because it's
It's secret.
He's the real diagrapher.
Yeah. But where is he now?
In between Greece and the Camper.
Okay. Trying to
That's in
get
Italy then.
some crystals, crystallize.
What is that, Vincent? Actually,
This
that
is-
small corridor.
Yeah, it's a small corridor that this is in Toin, so where the batelier, so all the builders, they will build boats, but also the families, most of them, they were like navigators. So it's really at the moment where Sambre becomes, it's only there that you can start to navigate with a big peniche after you get there. So that's where they would build them. And you have neighborhoods of families that are connected with that story, that they don't build the boats anymore, but there are still families there, and there are still remnants of that. And so this is a small kind of tiny street that goes from houses from that neighborhood to the river.
Is that done?
Yes, this is sort of access, yeah.
We were
But
there.
you can only walk by two, and there it's really tiny.
We were
city
there.
with the
We thought it was
hanging-
called Town.
I went to Toin.
Yeah, we've been there.
Ah,
And
yeah,
it's
The
a
hanging
Toin.
gardens. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
huh?
it's a
Yeah.
very interesting
Very nice.
Very
city, village slash.
Yeah. It's quite decrepit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have a Villeroy